Welcome, I'm Bonnie Graves, and it's my pleasure to be tasting some wine, and yes, it's the morning, in beautiful Pismo Beach, California. I wanted to introduce you today to what many are considering one of the flag bearers for cool wine in Pismo Beach. It's my pleasure to be chatting and tasting some wine with Mr. Ash Mehta this morning, and Ash is the proprietor of Tastes of the Valleys. I remember walking in here, I think when I first met you, it was some time ago, and I'm kind of a sommelier, a wino, and I come into a shop and I can kind of tell right away, is this, quote, a real wine shop, or is this sort of a tourist wine shop? And the minute I stepped in this place, I thought somebody who's passionate about wine is buying the wine here. It was almost like a treasure to discover this store. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and how did you come to decide to open in Pismo Beach?
Well, first of all, when you first came in, the real test was you bought wine.
Yes, I did. I know exactly what I bought.
So that was pretty cool.
Right.
Well, I mean, we have been in this area for about 10 years, and we moved here. I got a job to manage a title company, which has nothing to do with wine. And when the job ended, we decided to not move and figure out what else we could do here.
Next step.
Next step. What's the next step? Well, fortunately, we had a partnership. We actually have a partnership in a place in Solvang. So that kind of, we cut our teeth on that. So we took over running that for a few years. And
also a retail shop in Solvang?
It's
tasting bar?
Exactly. It's Taste of the Valleys. Wine bar, wine shop is a little bit different. It's fewer wines, focusing on specific
no Danish
wineries.
wines, though?
No Danish wines. I don't know if Danish wines exist, but they may. I know Swedish do.
Yeah.
So when it came time to decide whether we're going to move to look for another job or stay here, my wife and I decided that, okay, let's see how this goes.
So when did you get passionate about wine? Because I think that's a real story for a lot of people. Many people come to wine and they think, well, it's just my hobby, and I was certainly one of those where, wine, working as a sommelier, was always sort of a hobby of mine that I used to, pay the bills while I was pursuing my real career. And I think for a lot of people out there, your story is an interesting one where you can kind of be committed to a whole other career, and yet you have this growing passion for wine and then actually making a business out of it. So were you a wine drinker growing up? Did you just become interested, or what was your path to wine as a business?
No, I mean, we obviously socially drank wine, and I had a few bottles at home, but not anything that...
Not like this? There's a lot of bottles here now.
No, not even close to this. And, but what really got us into it was taking over managing the shop in Solvang. And that ignited a passion in us with this, and frankly, it's kind of an intoxicating business.
Yes, it is.
You can't really get away from it. I mean, there's so many characters in wine.
Absolutely, and characters behind the bottles as well.
That's absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Pismo Beach, because one of the things that I think is so unique about this area, and you mentioned Solvang, and I think for a lot of people, the whole kind of sideways effect and the explosion and the focus on Pinot Noir and the Santa Rita Hills and that whole area was so sort of discovered in that case by virtue of a movie. But one of the things that I love about Pismo Beach and that I love about this area is it still has a tiny bit of the undiscovered feeling about it in terms of wine, which I think is amazing. So for a lot of people, they're like, oh, Pismo Beach, and we know there's great surf here. We were here talking with the Wine Waves and Beyond event, amazing surf and a great charity beneficiary. But there's serious wine here. And how do you think people, how do we explain what makes Pismo Beach and wine make sense? I mean, what's the story there?
Well, primarily because, look, Edna Valley is, 10 minutes away.
Right.
Okay? You've got tremendous wineries in Edna Valley, so we already have a wine country here. So when visitors are coming to this area, where do they stay? Yeah,
let's locate that just a minute for people who may not be familiar. The whole Central Coast, which is, I think, outside of possibly the generic Sonoma Coast appellation, we're getting a little geeky here, but when we're talking about American viticultural areas, there's kind of the macro one, which is the Central Coast appellation, but within the Central Coast, there's these wonderful sort of smaller pockets, smaller appellations. You mentioned Edna Valley.
Correct.
Of course, we're talking about San Luis Obispo County. We've got actually 2 representative bottles here So maybe we'll go ahead and speak to each of these, because we've got two sort of titans, and I would say even pioneers, that helped to establish this small Edna Valley appellation within the broader appellation, really kind of put it on the map. Let's talk about the white that we have open first. This is a Chardonnay from Tally. What is it, a 15-minute drive from here, 20 minutes to get out to Tally?
Yeah, maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
You know, no more than that, and a very pleasant drive at that.
Yeah,
you know?
beautiful.
It's through, you know, rural land and everything. So this Tally is a 2010 from Oliver's Vineyard. And what we strive to do here is carry wines that aren't terribly widely distributed. So we chose this one because it's somewhat of a limited wine, and when you taste it, the characteristics. Again, like I said, wines develop a character. Each varietal can be made in several different ways, and this is one of my favorites because it has, you know, the little peachy, little citrusy with a little bit of toast to it.
I think one of the things I remember tasting Tally Chardonnay for the first time back working as a sommelier in New York, right at the beginning of my career. I can't remember what vintage it was, and I remember thinking, and literally going to my Jancis Robinson book of wine maps and going, Arroyo Grande, different than Arroyo Seco. Close, but different, and really trying to get my head around. I know, you know, what is this part of California? So for me, that was a really transcendent bottle, which in my own sort of tasting experience, I thought, wait a minute, I got to figure out where this place Arroyo Grande is. This is world-class. I know I'm tasting a world-class Chardonnay here. I got to figure out why. I know it could, you know, and I think one of the things I like about Brian Talley's sort of winemaking style is that it's Burgundian. It has a nod to that kind of Burgundian restraint, judicious use of oak. You know, there definitely is French cooperage on the wine, but more importantly, I think it still speaks California to me. Like, it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Correct.
It still has that bright, fresh fruit. You mentioned peach. I mean, it's certainly, you know, it smells like Chardonnay in the glass, but it has, in many ways, the best of both worlds, a Burgundian influence, a nod to French Chardonnay, but still that kind of bright, vibrant California fruit.
Right. And we need that. We need that here. We need that balance here because we have a different taste than the French do.
Yeah.
So that's why I like this, because it balances citrus with some of the more Chardonnay characters.
Well, and since we're talking Burgundy, unsurprisingly, Brian makes fantastic Pinot Noir. So,
yes,
you know, as our French friends figured out, in an area that is hospitable to Chardonnay, it's very likely that you're going to find Pinot Noir thriving as well. And I think one of the keys to understanding Arroyo Grande and why these Burgundian varietals thrive so well in a place like Tally, of course, it's soil, it's careful winemaking, it's an artisanal approach to treating the grapes, but it's also the cooling influence of the ocean.
Correct.
Which I think that fog, you know, it's a bit foggy this morning, it funnels right in, and you know, certain grapes like Zinfandel, for example, thrive in the sun. You can't kill Zinfandel no matter how hard you try. Pinot Noir, fussy grape. It likes that kind of
it does. And believe it or not, Arroyo Grande also makes some great Zinfandel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
you get enough sunshine,
exactly. When you go in the back, when it's, you know, away from some of the winds and stuff, it makes great Zinfandel
right.
too.
Well, Tally Vineyards, folks, in Arroyo Grande, about 15-20 minutes from Pismo Beach. Where else can you do surf in the morning and wine taste in the afternoon?
Absolutely.
It's a great combo. Let's move on to I think one of the most important wineries, frankly, in America, for many reasons. We're talking about Alban Vineyards, John and Lorraine Alban. And on the back here, I'm reading actually the first American winery and vineyard established exclusively for Rhone varietals. So, you know, again, in this area, we see the ability to support such a variety of grapes. Here we're talking Rhone varietals, so we've moved over to the land of Shiraz, Grenache, maybe a little more Ved, certainly white aromatic Rhones like a Viognier or Marsanne Roussanne. But John Alban was really, I think, the first guy to see, and I think late 70s for John, early 80s, at a time when everybody was wild for Napa Cab, that John was really quite the iconoclast and thought, wait a minute, how about some Syrah? Like me some Syrah. So let's talk a little bit about Syrah and that family of sort of Rhone varietals and what that means in this area.
You know, John Alban is well known for Rhone varietals. He's one of a handful of people who've got several hundred points from
big scores.
Parker's.
Big scores.
Big scores. So he really put Edna Valley on the map when it came to Rhone varietals. And this particular wine, the Petrina, is his what I call entry-level wine. Mm. You know, at $48, it may not be entry-level for everybody, but it is entry-level for Alban.
Price is a real factor when it comes to evaluating what makes a great wine. And some of John's wines are epic. They're also a little bit expensive for the average consumer. So I think this
there's a reason why they're expensive.
Oh,
I mean this $48 wine spent 24, 25 months in oak. Mm-hmm. So that costs money, you know, and the grapes for this particular wine were usually sold to other winemakers,
Right.
because they're younger vineyards. So John is making this Petrina, which is a beautiful, beautiful example of his winemaking style.
I think so. And one of the things that I really like, because of the coolish environment that we're talking about here, Syrah, or Shiraz as our Aussie friends call it, same grape, it's a grape that really reflects microclimate. So for me, one of the things I've always loved about Alban Shiraz particularly, are that they have a lot more in common with the sort of northern Rhone style than they do with the real fruit bomb Aussie southern hemisphere style. So for me, I love the kind of, you know, when you stick your nose in a glass, you get, sure, there's fruit there, but there's also such kind of intensity of soil characteristic, and there's a beautiful sense of kind of secondary earth aromas and all kinds of flavor characteristics that speak to me more of like a Côte Rôtie or Cornas or these northern Rhone appellations. So I don't think you'd stick your nose in the glass and say, that's an $8 glass of Shiraz, you know. I mean,
Right.
sure,
Yeah,
same
yeah,
grape,
yeah,
but
yeah.
here we're talking a lot more. I think it really, and you know, as a Hospice de Rhone event, another really fun wine event here in the area, has shown a lot of these, quote, local Syrahs can really hold their own on the world stage, poured side by side with beautiful Gigal or amazing wines.
And no doubt about it. And what John makes is, you always forget the ageability of these wines.
Yeah.
I mean, this wine could go
Yeah.
10, 15 years.
I think that's a factor for a lot of home collectors.
Correct.
To try to explain, and for you as a retailer, and let's come back to the shop here, because as Ash can tell you, in fact, even before we started chatting this morning, I'm already hunting around for treasures, and his beautiful wife had a great analogy that I think makes sense. You can buy books from Amazon.com and you can get the best price and you'll be certain that it'll be delivered to your doorstep, or you can enjoy the pleasure of going through, I love the Strand in New York, or what's one up in Portland, the amazing bookstore up there? Oh, I can't even remember, but I've spent hours of my life there.
The whole, it takes the whole
Exactly.
block, yeah.
And I think your approach as a retailer,
Powell's,
thank you. I think your approach as a retailer is kind of that, the joy of discovery, which is something that I knew I liked you before I met you, because I liked the way that you were kind of allowing your consumer to explore. And one of the ways that they can explore here in your shop is to actually taste wine. So tell us a little bit about, how do you choose what wines to pour? What, you know, we're not just a retail shop, but we're actually opening and sharing wine with your consumers. So what do you see are some of the trends here in Pismo of what grapes people are excited about?
We have a huge selection of wines. Okay,
Right.
we've got
In a small space.
Exactly. We at last, I just counted this morning, and we've got about 774 different wines in here, of which about 750 are available by the glass. Every day, any day, it doesn't matter.
Cool.
You come in here and say, I would like a glass of Alban Petrina. No problem. You can have it. You ask me, how do I decide what to open? I don't.
You let the
Let the consumer decide. Once the bottle's open, it also becomes a basis for our wine flights, and we do 6 individually poured 1 ounce tastes, and we, you know.
It's that kind of self-discovery that I love, Ash, and I think that's, for me, working as a sommelier for years in restaurants, it's the same thing if you're working with a great chef and, you know, you're doing a tasting menu and you've got 14 courses. There's nothing more fun than going and opening a bottle and saying, I know you're going to love it. It's the joy of sharing, the opportunity to let people say, I'm curious about that wine. Let's taste it together. And that's one of the things I know for me in the wine business. You mentioned the character of a wine and the characters behind the wine, and I think opening a bottle of wine and sharing with people is part of what drives an interest in the business, whether it's in a restaurant or in a beautiful retail shop like this. It's a desire not just to collect wine compulsively, but actually to open that wine, open that bottle, share it with someone you love, share it with friends. And I think that's really a spirit that you encounter here at Taste of the Valleys when you come in and you're curious and you say, you know, I'd like to taste that they know they're going to get a welcoming yes, and sure, let's taste it together. It's really, I think, a great business concept that seems like they got them packed in here. It's hard to get a seat.
Exactly, and you know, and it's fun when 4 people come in and open 4 different bottles of wine and then share the glasses that are poured from that amongst themselves. So essentially, it's, you know, I also want to mention that, you know, in the beginning when we started, we had no idea that we were going to end up with this many wines. And I'm not sure this is the upper limit yet. You know, we have to figure out some way of maybe hanging bottles from the ceiling or something.
There you go.
But we wanted to try a different concept here, where we wanted to have about 150 wines by the glass. But then that grew to 200, and it grew to 250, and all of that started looking great on a business card. So I said, let's go for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really helped to kind of make Pismo Beach a wine tasting destination in and of itself. I think there's been, it's great to get in your car, or better yet, have a driver, folks, and drive you around to individual wineries and taste wine. Or you can stop in at Ash's place. There's beautiful hotels and fun places to stay right here locally. So you don't necessarily have to get in your car and drive. There's quite a few tasting rooms that have opened up here in Pismo in general. You're one of several.
Exactly, and you don't need to drive because you have several hotels that are literally walking distance from the shop, from this this Price Street corridor, and you've got a winery that opened up. We absolutely were thrilled when they opened up across the street, and you've got another wine bar down the street, Vino Versado. You've got Sans Liege, so you've got a lot of options here. And remember, wineries close about 5.
Yep.
So you can continue your wine adventure after that time.
Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and have a taste of this delicious Aubin Syrah. And I want to thank you for sharing your generosity of spirit and these amazing wines with us today. So thanks so much.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Cheers.